All right. So we'll get started here. A couple things I want to mention before we kind of dive into material. The first is I have kind of this document that summarizes what the possible CL sessions are going to look like starting next Thursday. I also have this poll, so it's not worth any points. It's just a way for me to kind of get some data from you guys about what the most popular day and time is going to look like. I've heard back from all my undergraduate leaders for these, and I'm just trying to kind of coordinate how to fill those day and time slots based off their availability and kind of what's most popular with you guys. So if you can try to get those kind of submitted or fill out that poll by the end of the day tomorrow, I'll then kind of work on things over the weekend and have it ready to go next week. All right, to kind of tell you what the for sure day times and locations are going to be. Okay? Other than that, I've got up those first week module week quiz practice problems and practice answers. So this first week, there are no CL sessions, so you'll kind of you can go through those on your own. That quiz will pop up after class, and it's going to be due at the end of the day on Monday. Right? So just under half those questions are over the syllabus. Just over the other half are going to be kind of what we finished talking about today. You can kind of see what those questions will look like in these practice problems. All right. Now, another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use what's called a lockdown browser. So whatever device you're taking this quiz on, it won't allow you to access other web pages or Microsoft Excel, other programs. So plan accordingly. I'll kind of keep using these throughout the semester. Somewhat of a way to limit kind of generative AI. So if you're taking notes on your device, make sure you're like printing them out, right? So you can have them in front of you. If you're taking handwritten notes, you can kind of use those. You could even maybe print the practice problems out. So you can have whatever materials you have, you just won't be able to access them on your device, right? It's a way to kind of limit maybe the use of generative AI. You can't just copy and paste the questions, right? Other than that, I just wanted to make sure I mentioned, so that first module reading was, oh, where is that? Sorry, right here, was just set up as a way to kind of link you to Top Hat. So I had a lot of you having issues that talking after class. I reached out to the book rep, which is what I told you I do. And they're like, I don't know why. There was a hold put out on every one of your classes. So that's why we were running into the issue. Well, I know why there was a hold now, because I added an additional chapter and their system freaked out about it. But it should now be working that when you click on that link, it sends you to Top Hat. You'll use that join code I put in the syllabus for the first week slides. It then should kind of get you in. But when you register for this class, it should have accompanied that you already actually paid for that new test. So when I mention this access code, for like 99% of you, it'll be kind of seamless because you already paid for this when you registered for the class. If you're having any issues getting into that, you'll need to let me know as soon as possible, because this first module is not for any points. It looks like it is, but that was just I had to create an assignment to be able to link you up to Top Hat. And I wanted you to be able to do that before today. The first module reading is down here. That's going to be set to release after class. You click on that link or you're in on Top Hat, you'll then see that second chapter be released. You'll be expected to complete the questions in that module 2 chapter or reading by the end of the day next Monday. So the quiz, module readings are due at the end of the day on Monday. Make sure you're able to kind of get on the Top Hat. You're able to see those. Now, I had some questions. You won't see every chapter of the book. I'm kind of releasing those week by week. I'll already kind of put these up early, but usually after Thursday's class, I'll put up the next module slides as well. So that might kind of be a good thing to have the slides as you're going through that reading prior to the next week. And kind of priming your brains for the topics that we'll talk about in the following week. Other than that, we'll do a test quiz for these in-class quizzes. People are still kind of adding, dropping, moving around. So we won't start using them for points until next Tuesday's class. All right, but I'll kind of give you an idea about what they look like here today. We'll kind of walk through it step by step. Other than that, that should cover the housekeeping stuff. Unless there's any questions for me, we'll kind of dive back into material. You're good? Okay, so we'll kind of pull open. Where are they at? Those kind of lecture slides. So I'll start there. We left off talking about opportunity cost, right? So we said, whenever someone chooses to do something with their time or with their money, they're not doing something else. We called the value of what they're not doing their opportunity cost. Right? So we're going to look at some examples to think about this a little bit more. So the first one to think about is, let's say I'm choosing between 3 apartments, right? Now, if you don't are aware of this, the way the rental market works in Bloomington, you should probably already start thinking about that now. You have to do this kind of well in advance. But let's say I have these 3 apartments available to me, and here's their monthly rent. Which one of these apartments would I want to choose? C, right? The one that has the lowest rental cost. Let's assume everything else is the same, right? Same amenities, same number of roommates, etc. So I want to choose the one that has the lowest rent because that's the lowest cost, right? What have I not factored in is that what if each one of these apartments is a different kind of number of minutes away from campus, further walks? Well, if I'm further from campus, I have to give up more time. If my time is valuable, I can do other things with it. As I have to use more time to live in this apartment, the opportunity cost is going to be higher. Right? Now, intuitively know that. Like, if rent was the same, do you want to live 15 minutes from campus or 5? Or 5. Right? So here we're thinking about, well, if I know there's an opportunity cost, and I know that that's going to be higher when I have to give up more of my time to walk to and from campus, I need to factor that in my decision-making process. So let's just assume where this number comes from. I'm just using the data here. But let's say I value, if I can put a dollar amount to how much I value my time, let's say I said $10 an hour. Right? You could also maybe think about this as like, what if I had my value of my time if I could be working a job making $10 an hour, something like that. So if that's the case, and I know the number of hours I'm going to lose each month from walking to and from campus from these apartments, if every hour I value at $10, the total amount, the total value of time I'm giving up will be the number of hours it takes me to walk to and from campus from that apartment, times the value of each hour, $10. I would see that the apartment further from campus has a higher opportunity cost to me living there. So once I've determined these opportunity costs, I should be making decisions based off of total costs. So I won't use this terminology as much in this week. Eventually, once we get to firm decisions, which is I think after the first exam, I'll use this terminology, which is like explicit costs. That was rent. That's how much money I had to hand over to have this apartment. Or if you want to buy a sandwich, it's the amount of money I have to hand over to actually the company to give me that product. Okay? So I've got these explicit costs, but what also matters are these opportunity costs as well. So if we then kind of determine what are the total costs of choosing each apartment, I would take the rent and I would add up what that opportunity cost was from the loss of time having to walk to and from campus living in that apartment. Is this questions on this idea? So once I factored in these opportunity costs, now which apartment would I want to choose? The one with the lowest total cost, right? Factoring in these opportunity costs. So we can see here from this very simplistic example, if we make decisions just based off of that explicit cost, I'm making the wrong decision. It's something that actually is going to cost me even more because I didn't factor in those opportunity costs of lost time. Okay? So this would apply to kind of any other thing you're thinking about losing time on. You know, maybe I'm a company, right? If I can produce pants or shirts in my production facility, any textile, well, having my workers produce pants, yes, maybe I can earn a profit. But what's the opportunity cost of that? Maybe I could be making even higher profits producing shirts. Right? So as a firm, what would I choose to do? Switch over to the other product, right? I want to be factoring in these costs of what I'm giving up to do what I'm currently doing. Mm-hmm. So if I value my time even higher, what starts to be a more attractive partner? Or as a reminder, the one that is closer to campus. Because if I'm giving up less time, my opportunity cost is going to be lower. If I value my time even more, that means I'm reducing that cost by a larger amount. So if we use this higher value, let's say I can work a job paying me even more during this time. My opportunity cost now would be the amount of loss of time times 20. My opportunity costs would then be factored into my total cost. And like we said, which apartment now becomes very attractive or has the lowest total cost, rent plus the opportunity cost. Now I'm back to thinking about choosing an apartment. Now, which of these apartments is going to be more attractive if I don't value my time at all? Right? I just want to choose one of the we all value our time to some degree, so it's a bit of a extreme example, but I'm trying to kind of make this point. Any questions on this idea? We're going to kind of jump to a slightly different concept here, building on this. Okay, so with this idea of being able to calculate these total costs, we're then going to start to think about, well, when I choose to make different decisions, what's happening to the change in my cost? So this word of marginal cost, marginal, another term for that is simply the change in or the difference in my cost. Now here we're specifically looking at the differences in my total cost, which factor in these opportunity costs. Okay? So if I have this kind of example set up, I'll change it a little bit. Let's assume we have 3 apartments. Rent is the same in all of them. However, I'm going to factor in that they were different distances from campus. So to get my total cost, I would take the rent, add in those opportunity costs. Let's say these are the values. If I'm currently living in, I think it was apartment 1, right, my current apartment. If I then move to apartment 2, what would my marginal cost be? Yeah, my total costs are 1,240 if I switch, but marginal is the change. So if I'm going from my original apartment to apartment 2, my costs went up by $120. Now, what would my marginal cost be if instead I went from my current apartment to apartment 3? 240. What was the change in my total cost? It went from 1,120 to 1,360. So we're talking about marginal costs. It's the change in my total cost from this decision that I changed. You can think about it in this way. If I'm a firm, what's the marginal cost of producing one more good? Whatever it is. So that's part of it, right? Whatever I'm giving up, not producing something else. And then it would also include how much I'm paying my workers, the inputs, the raw materials I need, right? They were looking at not the total, but the change in my cost from producing one more unit. So you can think about some other things in a slightly more individualistic kind of context. What's the marginal cost of studying one more hour? Well, it doesn't have to be like I could work a job during that hour, although I could, like even something like tutoring. Right? You might think about picking for a whole shift, but no, you could do something like tutor and make it just within a 1 hour time block. But also, what are you not doing if you study 1 more hour? Maybe doing something else you like, hanging out with friends, playing video games, online betting, I don't know, right? So what I'm giving up, although there's not like a dollar amount associated with it, it's something I would enjoy doing. If I could put a dollar amount to that, that's what I'm giving up. That would be my opportunity cost of taking that hour to study. And if I value those things very highly, I might not study, right? I'm going to choose to do those things. So you could also think about, what if I'm driving? So the marginal cost of driving somewhere, well, I'm losing time. That'd be one of the opportunity costs that gets factored in. But what would more of like that explicit cost be? Like, what am I going to have to hand money over for in order to drive another 50 miles? Gas, right? So I want to factor that in. If I drive another 50 miles, the marginal cost would be the change in the opportunity cost from the lost time, but also that change in how much more gas I have to buy, whatever that change in total cost would be. I want to make a point here, and really we won't focus this more until I think it's module 9, so quite a bit later in the semester with firms. But here, I sometimes we'll get people say, what's another cost to driving? Someone will go wear and tear, I could factor in, but some people will say insurance. Let's think about this carefully. Marginal costs are the change in my cost from doing something. If I have to pay for insurance for the next year, and then I choose tomorrow to drive 100 miles instead of 50, if it was just that insurance, how did that impact my marginal costs? Didn't impact them at all. Because if I drive 50 miles, how much should I pay for insurance? $1,000 for the next year. If I drive 100 miles, how much should I pay for my insurance? I already paid that same $1,000 for the next year. So when we're thinking about some of these costs, they won't influence my marginal cost. In my earlier example, where I had rent always the same, there the marginal cost wasn't impacted at all from switching apartments just from rent. What was my marginal cost being impacted by? My opportunity cost. So a lot of the costs we have don't actually get factored into my marginal cost. Any questions on that before we kind of progress here? So the next thing that we want to talk about, well, yes, the idea of like renting those apartments, I want to choose the one with the lowest cost. But I said assume that the amenities are all the same square footage, number of roommates, etc. If those characteristics change, I might like living in an apartment that was built last year compared to a house that was like 70 years old, right? So what we also want to weigh out when we're making decisions is not only my marginal costs, but my benefits or my marginal benefits to doing something. So once again, marginal, when I change my decision, moving apartments, buying one more unit of something, from a firm producing one more unit, I want to weigh out those costs and benefits, right? So what is a marginal benefit? It's the additional benefit associated with doing something, right? Now, if I think about some examples of this, if I accept a job offer once I get done with college, what's like the primary like marginal benefit you're thinking about? Money, right? I wasn't making any money maybe as a college student. My marginal benefit is the salary, right? That change in my income, okay? It could even be if I have a job currently paying 50,000. If I accept another job where I'm making 60, what would my marginal benefit be? The difference between the two, 10,000. Okay. Now, what if I work an additional hour? If I'm thinking about I'm getting paid an hourly wage rate, my marginal benefit is simply that change in my pay, how much I'm being paid per hour. This is where we want to be careful. When we're talking about benefits, we're not talking about opportunity costs. Those get factored into my costs. Okay? So the marginal benefit of working another hour, that's just how much I'm going to be getting paid, or the increase in my salary or income then. Now, what if I'm a firm? What's the marginal benefit, right, of selling one more gallon of gas? Whatever the price of a gallon of gas is, right? It's not the profit, because what is profit? It's benefits or revenues minus costs. If we only want to know the marginal benefits in the context of the firm, this would be my marginal revenue. Revenues are what benefits those firms. So we kind of think about it as a more like firm standpoint. What about being an economics instructor or teacher? So yes, salary matters. That's part of my marginal benefit. But what also might matter? How much I like the job. I chose to do this because I didn't want to sit behind the desk and crunch numbers and run statistical models all day. I enjoy kind of seeing the light bulb kind of pop on. I probably also to some degree enjoy kind of talking with younger people to make sure I'm not getting too old and curmudgeon. Right. So it's not just like money that's the benefit, right? It's how much people enjoy things, how much happiness it brings them. Now, that's a lot harder to measure, right? We can put hypothetical values to it to like look at different problems in this class, but really like it's much more complex. We have to use like higher level statistics, looking at people's decisions to look at like what's the benefit in terms of like happiness it's bringing them. Yes, money matters, but so does like how much I enjoy something. We won't dive too deep into that early on. We will later on in the semester talk about this, and the word we give to it is what we call utility. It just means like happiness doing something. I also bring this one up because I think it's an interesting example, and it ties into things that we'll talk about later today. So they did this study. I forget where it was, but I'll give a different example than the study used. So it's like the same apartment complex, and it was just cookie cutter units, like same number of rooms. They were all built in the same year. Everything looked the same. So like we've held everything kind of constant. So where I grew up, let's say this apartment complex was there. I grew up down here in Michigan, right? So right on the lake, we're close to it. And they have apartments like this. And what do you think is true about the ones that are facing out towards the lake versus the ones facing towards a highway and trees? People want to pay more for the ones with a better view. Well, what did we do there? We held all these other factors constant, and we just want to know what's the marginal benefit of that view. It must be how much more people are willing to pay in rent. We'll talk a little bit why we'll pay up to that point. That's equal to my marginal benefit, essentially. So with this idea of marginal benefits in mind, I also want to introduce one more concept. So I probably gonna have to mow the lawn next week, and it's supposed to be like 90 plus every day. If you didn't know that, it's gonna be brutal walking around here. So if I show up a little bit sweaty, I apologize. All right. So if I'm out mowing the lawn, super hot day, I get in, go to my garage fridge. The thing that sounds the best, it's gonna bring me a huge marginal benefit, is to crack open a nice cold beer. All right. So it's consumed 1 unit of it good. Well, it's causing me to kind of cool down, right? Like I'm feeling pretty good after mowing the lawn. So I'm like, you know what? I'll have a second. Well, the second one, like it didn't really, I'm already kind of cooled down a little bit. It wasn't as like beneficial. I also, might start kind of getting a little bit less efficient around the house. If I continue to consume those beers, I've already cooled down. There's no benefit from that. And I start, getting yelled at by my wife because I'm like, 5 beers deep. And so it starts to bring me really low marginal benefits, right? Well, the same thing applies to anything you do. The same would apply to like firms. So let's think about it this way. If a firm hires a worker, what's the marginal benefit? How much or how many more units that worker can produce? Well, who do I hire first? The best, most efficient worker. High marginal benefit. Who do I hire second? The next most efficient. Might still be a positive marginal benefit, but it's going to be lower than the first. I hire the best worker first. So what's going to be happening as people consume more of a product, firms produce more of a good, my marginal benefit is going to be declining, or we end up kind of referring to as diminishing marginal benefits. So with this idea in mind, we have diminishing marginal benefits, and we'll talk about marginal decision making based off of those marginal benefits and marginal costs. We'll also talk about one more fact or one more characteristic of marginal cost as well. So just to kind of make this point, when I upload these slides, so I already uploaded module 2 because we're going to probably have time to jump into it today. But usually week by week after Thursday's class, I'll release the next module slides. Anytime you see blank slides, that probably means I'm going to be doing things right here. These don't get captured in the recordings. These would be really, really, really good things to take notes on. Okay. So let's think about how people make decisions. Okay. Well, if the additional benefits, so marginal benefits, I'm just going to kind of, notate it or kind of truncate that to be MB. If the additional benefits I get from doing something are greater than the additional costs, do I want to buy that good or choose to do that activity? Yeah, I can almost think about that in that scenario. What are my net benefits? I could think about that as the additional benefits minus the additional costs, right? So if that's positive, I want to buy that product. I want to produce that product as a firm. I want to choose to do that activity. Okay. Now, let's assume that then my marginal benefit, if it's less than my marginal costs, well, now my net benefits are negative. I don't want to choose to do that. I don't want to buy that good. I don't want to produce that good. It wouldn't be a self-interested, rational decision. Okay. So this is how people make decisions. They make it based off of marginal costs and marginal benefits. Right? So I want to make this point, right, that we only make decisions based off of the changes in benefits and the changes in costs. Right? So let's think about, we could even put this in the context of a firm is probably how I'll talk about this next. So let's say I've got the total benefits from my current production and the total costs from my current production. And let's say it's what, 1,000, and we'll do 1,500. Okay. So I can think about calculating my net benefits, or if I put this in the context of a firm, what's a firm's net benefits? Well, their benefits are how much money they're making from selling the goods. So that's their revenues. And then their cost of producing these goods are their costs. So what's the difference between revenues and costs? Their net benefits we typically refer to as their profits. Right? So if I look at the totals, right, what are my net benefits or my profits here? Negative 500, right? I'm losing money. Okay. So do I just shut down my production completely, right? I have whatever my current costs are. I'm still going to have to pay them. Well, maybe not, right? Because if I stay open, let's assume I produce one more unit. And the marginal benefit of that unit is 100. And the marginal cost, what it cost me to produce that, is 50. Well, what are my new total benefits? And what are my new total costs? Well, if I started out at 1,000, marginal benefits are 100. That means that gets added in, right? That's the change in my total benefits. So my new total benefits would be 1,100. What are my new total costs? Well, they started out at 1,500. They went up from the production of this good by 50. My new total cost would be what? 1,550. So now what are my net benefits, or what is the firm's profits? The difference between these two is now negative 450. So would I choose to produce this good? Yeah. What did I do? I'm not losing 500 now. I'm only losing 450. It's better to lose less money, right? And so we'll always choose to do something, even if the total costs are greater than the total benefits. We still continue to do something as long as that marginal benefit is greater than that marginal cost. Choosing to do more of that, producing, selling more, choosing to put more time toward that activity, if I'm thinking about like an individual context, it always would then make me better off. So we don't compare totals when making decisions. We look at the margin, marginal cost compared to marginal benefits. Any questions on this idea here? Okay. So if we take this idea in mind, or have this idea in mind, I guess I should use correct grammar. Let's say we revisit that idea that as I do more of something, right? So this could be the quantity of time, this could be the quantity of goods that I'm selling, quantity of goods I'm buying, whatever the example would be. I'm putting more time or money or resources towards this thing. If I was thinking about the marginal benefit of every single buying one more, producing one more, what did we say was going to be true about that marginal benefit? It's going to be, as I buy more, as I put more time towards things, the additional benefit was decreasing, right? So any examples that I give you in those practice problems, we'll be thinking about I have this declining marginal benefit. Now, kind of a similar concept, but if I'm thinking about marginal costs, put it in an individual context first. If I am going to study for another hour, what hour of my day am I going to choose to give up? The one that I valued the lowest, right? If I was just, instead of giving up the time slot where I was going to go hang out with my friends, I give up the time slot where I was just chilling in my dorm. Unless you really like me, right? But the idea is whatever you value, you give up the thing that you don't care about the lowest, which means your opportunity cost is going to be really low. Well, as I put more time towards studying, what hours do I have to start giving up? Hours that I valued highly. So what's happening to my marginal cost? My opportunity costs are going up. The marginal cost of studying one more hour are then also increasing more and more. If I think about, firms making production decisions, well, what resources, which of my workers am I going to use first? Well, I'm going to pay the workers if the amount of units I'm getting is the same from everyone, they're all the same efficiency, I'm going to pay the worker that will work for me for the lowest amount. Who do I hire second? As long as they're just as productive, I hire who would ever work for me at the next highest amount. So what's happening to my marginal costs? They're actually increasing as we choose to do more of something. Firms produce more. We choose to buy more of a good. We choose to, put more of our time towards an activity. Okay? So hopefully this kind of lines up with your basic intuition. So if we have this kind of graphical representation of this, what's going to be true in this area? So I'll just kind of write this out in the context of a firm, but you could replace the word produce with consume, purchase, spend my time, right? For every unit in this range, what is true? The marginal benefit is greater than my marginal cost. So if I was a firm, should I choose to produce these units? Yeah. The additional revenue benefit to the firm is greater than the additional costs. Or should you put more time towards something, towards studying? Well, if the additional benefit it's going to have on my exam performance is greater than the additional costs or what I'm giving up to use that time, then yes, I want to produce or I want to consume or I want to buy more of that or put more time towards that activity. Now, what's going to be true over here? For every quantity in this range, my marginal benefit is now less than my marginal costs. So my kind of marginal net benefits there are negative. I'm actually worse off. So if I'm a firm, I would not want to produce in this range. If I'm buying something, I don't want to buy any of these units, right? So where would I stop? I would choose to do something, buy that good, produce that good, put more of my time towards it, up to the point where those two things are equal, right? That's where I stop. Now, this equality point becomes a little bit weird, and this is where we start to introduce the idea that in economics, sometimes the answer is, it depends, right? So I know that people will choose to do something as long as the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost. But what's true about the change in my net benefits? Or if I'm a company, what's the change in my profits from that unit where marginal benefits are equal to marginal cost? Change is zero. So am I any better off? Am I any worse off? So I might choose to do that. I might not. My net benefit is the same either way, right? So what we say in economics, people will always go up to that point. At that point, they are indifferent. If I'm solving a problem or a model, that's the quantity that we say people will stop at. Truly, we don't know if they're going to buy that good or not, but we know every point before that, they would choose to buy more of that, choose to put those hours towards that activity, choose to produce those goods if they're a firm. Right? Any questions on this idea? Yeah.
They have the opportunity. I guess the they choose to stop that. Right.
So we don't know.
Okay.
But usually what we if you don't want to worry about this, I'm going to answer the question. It's a little more complex than I would ask you, but some of you are more math-minded, you might get this. Usually our production facility or production decisions or how much we buy, we can put in increments of time. We can put in technically only to the second decimal of money, right? If this is a truly continuous measure of marginal benefits, it gets like, I approach this point where they're equal more and more. So in the limit, what is that difference? Zero. So it's like, we go up to, that stopping point was 10 units. We go up to 9.99999999999, and the limit is basically at that. So you can think of this as like, they're going to stop. And it might be just before that point, but what we're saying is this is our optimal point. We know we'll never go past this. Does that answer your question? I kind of way to do that. Once again, sorry for the kind of math tangent there, but yeah, that's how we think about it. Yeah. Yeah, so I won't kind of add any of those types of questions into this idea, but in our earlier example, if I valued but you're asking the question, so it's be rude of me to just dismiss it. when we said I valued my time at $10 instead of, or 20 instead of 10, what would happen at every unit if I'm giving up time? My opportunity cost would be higher. The change in my cost would be higher. So at every point, my marginal costs are now higher. So what happens to the optimal amount of this activity I should do? It will go down. So yes, we could see shifts in these marginal cost, marginal benefit lines, which would change that point that we stop at, but I won't give you any of those shifts yet. We'll talk more about shifts module 2 next week. Yep. Any other questions at this point? Okay. So where are we at time-wise? Oh, perfect. So we'll go back here. So I left these slides open. We kind of talked through or worked through these examples. We'll now kind of return to some more like definitional stuff. So these hopefully will be like maybe some slightly easier questions on the quiz, but it's some terminology and just a way to think about economics. So we're going to have two types of statements in economics. One, we're going to call positive statements. It's what people are actually doing. You can think of this as if we view things in the data, this is what we see. These are the decisions we see people making, the decisions we see firms making. This is hard facts, this is data, this is what people are doing. So maybe we look at the data and we see some income data, savings, and we see on average, people save 5% of their income. Well, maybe we have a model that says, if you want to retire at 65, you should actually be saving more than 5%. What we'll call those are normative statements. They're just opinions, because saying that you should save more than 5%, that's assuming you want to retire at 65. Maybe you don't want to. So these normative statements are opinions, right? They're not what people are actually doing. They're usually just suggestions or my opinion of what they should be doing. Positive statements is something that's rooted in statistics or facts of what people are actually currently doing. Is that questions on that? We're just differentiating between these two things, kind of set us up for thinking about opinions versus facts. So normative economics, that's just like your opinion. You guys haven't seen this. Anyone know what this movie is? Yeah. Big Lebowski. It's an older, if you haven't seen it, I think it's hilarious if it's worth the time. Yeah? So we have this difference. We're going to tie this to the fact that just like physics or biology, economics is a social science. We're not studying the chemical structure of something. We're studying like the structure of society, how people are making decisions. So in all these things, maybe chemistry, we have this theory of how the, combination of these two elements is going to, how they'll react with each other. That's our model. In economics, maybe we have a model that predicts, I don't know, how much people are going to choose to litter or pollute, right? So we have this theory, right? We then go out and we run an experiment, just like you would in chemistry. We observe this experiment or the outcome. Now in economics, typically that's like we're collecting data and the experiment is just people living their lives, firms making their production decisions. We then go out and look at the data after these experiments that happen, these like natural experiments just from people and firms kind of existing. We then take that data and we say, does it line up with our theory? So the data is like the positive statement. Our original theory was more of like the normative statement, right? What should be happening. So if you want to think, we like test these normative statements with data, right? Positive statements. So, this is just a generalized scientific method. We're just applying it to economics. The collecting data component is kind of just done naturally, or the experiment, I should say, is done naturally, and then we somehow collect data on it. Okay. So what do our economic models look like that we're testing? So in my earlier examples, remember I was saying things like you have these apartments and all the amenities are exactly the same square footage, number of roommates. Why was I doing that? Because we wanted to know what's the relationship between how much someone's going to pay and maybe the value, like having a better view. I was trying to isolate the relationship between two variables. So we kind of have this Latin term that we often use, which is other than that, those two variables I want to analyze, hold everything else constant, right? Because if I don't, maybe some of these other factors will actually influence how much people are willing to pay, not just the value of that better view. So all of our models are, we're going to typically be looking at the relationship between two variables. We're holding everything else constant. So what this allows us to do is kind of say something like, if I increase the price, how much more are people going to buy? Well, that's assuming that the quality of the product has remained the same, right? That's assuming that the area of the country that I'm selling this product is the same. It's holding all these other factors constant, so I can just look at the relationship between price and the quantity that people are purchasing. Right? So I think usually our models, especially in this class, are an oversimplification of like real world. We have statistical methods, econometrics, and how we can control and hold these other things constant. But at least for right now, we're assuming other things are equal. We're kind of starting out with the basic models. So I have an example of what this would kind of look like. Okay, so I put up a link, I forget without opening it, with some study or some mainstream media kind of report of some work that was done, right? So the example was in this paper, the returns to a college degree or college education. Right? So let's say we have a model, it's an older model, and it predicts that the value of a college degree, you can expect your earnings once you're done to go up by 50%. That's our theory. That's what our model predicts. What this study did was it kind of went and pulled some data. This came from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the government agency that collects data on this. In fact, once you're done with college, I think I've done 2 of these. They'll like to reach out to you and ask you to self-report different things, income that's going on. And I think these were like weekly earnings, if I remember right. And so they found, and this is older data, so the numbers might seem a little bit odd, but though the average weekly earnings of someone with a college degree was about $1,400, the average earnings weekly of someone without one was $850. If I take a ratio of those two, the increase or the percent increase in expected weekly salary from having a college degree was about 68%. That doesn't line up with my theory. And my theory was slightly off. So what should I do? The data doesn't support my theory. I need to go back and update my theory. Right? This study also kind of looked at what was kind of interesting, and this is a little bit more nuanced. We won't talk about inflation in this class, but when they adjusted for inflation, this was like older time periods. When they looked at 2024 values, what they found was like, and it was a little bit off, I'm rounded to the nearest integer, but they still found in the most current time period, it's still about 68%. So if that return is constant, we probably can hopefully nail down a model that would end up predicting that, right? Because we see that's what's playing out in experiments, right? That we've collected data on. These people kind of living their lives, firms choosing the time how much they're going to pay their workers. So this kind of example we can think about this scientific process. We're going to have the theory, these natural experiments that are going on in the world. We collect data on them and then maybe revisit and update our theories. Okay. And I think I had here the link. Oh, maybe I didn't. No, I'll update my slides because it was on the previous slide. So here's the link to where this data actually exists if you're interested in playing around with it. Once we get to like these Canvas discussions, usually you'll kind of see similar databases. I might ask you to report different values from. So with this example even in mind, let's start to think about our models that are trying to predict the relationship between two variables, right? So unfortunately, a lot of the times what we're going to do is we're going to compare means, right? So here kind of in our earlier example, we might predict that once I have a college degree, my earnings increase, right? And then our example was like 68%, right? So, this might not be a good measure because what's true about means, some of the people in this data set who maybe have a college degree are making billions, right? We're going to greatly skew our mean, which means the average person can't expect that increase, right? But that's because we held all these other factors constant. The only thing we were looking at is what's the average someone with a college degree versus not. So what's another thing that can kind of influence these averages, right? Or why might this relationship between having a college degree and my increase in earnings not be evidence of a causal effect? So correlation, we can see that having a degree and earnings, there is a correlation. When someone has a degree, they can expect a pretty high return on it. But I'm assuming everything else is constant. What if I'm comparing the returns to education of someone getting a business degree, finance, marketing, etc., compared to, I'll pick up my sister here, someone who majors in anthropology? The returns, speaking from her, experience, are quite a bit low, right? So we've held that constant. If we start to allow these other factors to change, maybe we get very, very different results. But we're just comparing means here. We're holding all those other factors constant. We only have evidence of a correlation, not truly causal, right? So I'll give you some other examples here. Let's think about, I have, a positive correlation between ice cream sales and drowning. This is true. This is a positive statement, right? This actually exists in the data. So what? I say there's a causal relationship. If people are eating ice cream more, they're kind of getting this, they're crashing after taking all this sugar. So then when they're swimming, they're more likely to drown. Okay. And we know that's not. So there's not a causal relationship, but these things are positively correlated. Why? We haven't factored in when do both of these things for an area are probably higher if the temperature is higher. There's this outside factor we don't really have kind of baked in. We're just looking at the correlation between these two areas. So our goal in these models, our goal is to hold these other factors constant, like temperature, so that we don't just have to report a correlation between two variables. Hopefully it's more accurate evidence of a causal relationship. Any questions? You guys are being pretty quiet compared to my earlier section, which is earlier in the day. So you guys should be a lot more lively, right? A lot more interactive. Okay. Maybe it's just the second time through the class I'm doing a better job of explaining. Maybe that's what it is, right? Just another example I think it's kind of interesting to start thinking about this is if you look at a lot of data, there's actually a negative correlation between the number of hours someone's self-reported hours of someone studies and their like exam or testing. But let's think about why that's the case. Who is going to need to study? Someone who doesn't understand the concepts in the class. Well, if I don't initially understand the concepts in the class, that likely means I'm not going to do as well. We're not like picking. I'm not saying you shouldn't study more, but people with lower IQs would have to study more for something to get the same performance as someone who has a higher IQ. So even though there's a negative correlation between the number of hours studied and exam performance, maybe that's because the people who are studying more have to. They don't have an innate ability to be successful in this activity, taking the test. I'll give you another example where, and this is what we call maybe a selection issue. So I, as one observation in a data set, could be evidence of a negative correlation between the number of hours I practice and my performance in golf. I have no innate ability. I have tried. I am terrible. I can guarantee you I could practice 40 hours a week at golf and my performance would still be low, right? In fact, I might end up being frustrated and might actually go down, right? Well, who is going to be able to put in fewer number of hours in practice, but still maintain really high performance in golf? I don't follow golf, but who's like the best person? Is it Steve? I don't know who's best. Whoever, so people gave the answers. That person, right, could put in an hour of practice every week, and they're going to still have high performance. When I look at the data overall, I might see a negative correlation because who needs to practice more? People who aren't as good, but even if they practice more, they might not do as well as others who have this general innate ability. Or like in my studying example, have this underlying innate better IQ, higher IQ. Okay. So with our models, we don't just want correlation, we want evidence of causal effects. Okay. And the way that we can get at this is if we could hold IQ, if we could hold IQ constant, well, then we can see if there's a causal relationship between hours studied and exam performance. If I can hold constant someone's major, then I can get a better idea or get closer to this causal relationship. So that's the end of module 1. If I have something I want to say here, we're not leaving today. Okay? I will get a link up likely. You'll see an announcement on Canvas. And it kind of changes semester to semester of when these occur. But one of the things that I'm talking about is like when we run these experiments, these are people just naturally living their lives and collecting data. There are things called, they're actually called economic experiments. So a whole field of study where typically it's they set these economic gains, which are essentially you just making decisions. Sometimes you take on the role of a firm. And they're generally like all these computers that are like connected. It's just like I'm gonna date myself. The Age of Empire is still a thing. There was this old computer game, and like you made decisions, and there's your society better than you play some game where you're making decisions, then collect data on that and see did you do better in this game or not. Now it's not some fun video game, but generally like they have some numbers and decisions, and they tell you what your corresponding profits are, and you're just making decisions on a computer. So this is a pretty big field here, and I use there's a lot of professors doing these. And if you want to sign up for them, I don't know what the exact rate is right now, but you get paid, right? You get paid for simply showing up, and then how well you do in the game. Like if it's a firm decision, whatever your profits are in the game, your pay is actually increased. Right? So there's like some incentive to not just show up and like click and not think about what you're doing, right? So I'll put up a link, an announcement on Canvas if you're interested in doing that. Way to make some easy money. All right. You'll take your hours that you don't value very high and put them towards that. Okay. So that's module 1. That's all the information you'll be expected to kind of have going into that module week 1 quiz, which is due when? The end of the day, Monday. Also, I think I might have failed to mention something earlier. The top hat readings are due at the end of the day, Monday. But I said Tuesday, there's one caveat. They're actually due at 11:50 because I need some time for Canvas and top hat to be able to sync up. Otherwise, it treats everybody's grade as late. You get what score for a late? 0. Late submitted assignment. I don't want you to all see zeros in the grade book. All right. So with that idea in mind, one thing that we're not really doing this week that we will do next week is I'll start using these in-class quizzes by a measure of like you being here and your participation in class. So here I've got, where is that? There it is. So this is typically what it'll look like when we use these in-class quizzes. Today is not for any points. I just have this created so I can show you what they'll look like next week. So usually I kind of already have this. Say usually, I always have this on Canvas. This one today is set for 0 points. I'll kind of look at because I use it at different points in the class. Also kind of how I keep it fluid depending on how fast we cover things. I'll then kind of go in here. I'll go to my settings and I'll say, okay, we have the next 10 minutes once I release this to kind of get this submitted. I'll give you an access code for the day. So today is just to make sure we can get into these okay. All caps INDY, right? My son's name. So you'll get this entered in. Now, once you start, you'll have 10 minutes to kind of get it done. I'll hit return here, then kind of come back down. Now, one thing I will sometimes also do, whoops, I forgot to do this, just to kind of show you. I'll usually kind of say, okay, where are we at in class? It's what? 12:04. So to make sure you have all 10 minutes. Oops, I'll go down here and make sure the due date time kind of lines up with that. I'll then publish it. You should then be able to see this show up on Canvas. You'll then click into it, all right? You'll have the next 10 minutes once you get it pulled open to work on it. You can talk to the people around you and work together. You want to work on your own, you can. I'll then kind of let you go. So right now, make sure you can get into that quiz. You hit that passcode was capital I, capital N, capital D, capital Y.
Did it like reset the phone? I'm refreshing.
Reset what?
Like when you put up in 12 to 20, like reset to 12.
Oh, it should be okay. It's not for any points today, so you can still access it. Not popping up. Okay.
Hit assignment. Hit assignment. Quizzes or assignment.
So it's not working from your home.
Reset back and 12. Yeah, it's there. Yeah.
Oh, hold on. So who is it opening for? Were you able to open it on the homepage? No. Okay. So why would that be the case? Well, for today, I'll make sure I figure out what this tech issue has worked from my earlier section. So if you can't access it from the homepage, once I publish it, you should always be able to access it from that quiz tab. Guys, talking here, try to keep it to a much duller. We're gonna be here longer. You guys don't give me some time to talk. Okay. Guys, if I'm standing here silent, what do you think I want you to do? Stop talking, right? So I want to ask you some questions so we can get through and figure out why this isn't working. So if you go to the quizzes tab, are you able to access it? Is anyone not able to? Okay, now we're done, right? That's all I wanted to ask. I understand you want to talk. We're excited. We're going to get through things quicker. I don't have to go on a little bit of a rant here. And we'll get out of here a little bit earlier. You valued your time, so you get some of it back. Okay? All right, so if you can get into it, all you have to do today is respond to the questions. If not with any points, I just want to make sure we're getting it working. So I've already identified an issue of accessing on the homepage. That allows me to make sure next week that's not occurring. Okay? So I think the questions were like just what classification you are. That gives me a little bit of data. Most of you are freshmen. And then is IU going to win the national championship again this year? Okay? I would say hopefully, but don't hate me too much. I'm a Purdue grad, so I'm working for the enemy. So that's what they'll typically look like. We'll use them for points next week. So we've still got quite a bit of time left in class, right? We get out of here at what, 12:35. So to set us up for next week, I'm going to dive into module 2 slides. So those should be up on that homepage of Canvas. Okay. I've got module 2 here. You can see the outline, skeleton slides. After class today, that module reading will pop up. You can access it. And then once again, after class today, you'll see the quiz 1 get posted up under the quiz 1 materials, module 1 quiz materials. Okay. All right. So any questions for me? Anything related to structure of the class, in-class module reading, or weekly module quizzes before we jump into module 2 material for a little bit? Okay. All right. So module 2 is about the most macroeconomic we're going to get this entire semester. Okay. So I'm going to work through kind of our basic production possibilities curve model. If you search this, you might see it referred to Google search. You might see it referred to as the production possibilities frontier. 2 names for the same thing. All right. So what we're going to think about is economies, countries, states, companies even. It's not, we can take these, they're like more macroeconomic principles, but we can make them a little more micro. They face scarce resources. Right. So the resource I'm going to focus on here is labor, the amount of workers, labor hours they have. So we're also going to keep it simple and think about this economy can only produce 2 goods. All right, we'll say technology good of computers and an agricultural good of wheat. Right, so we have 2 things that they can put their production towards. Computers, or I said produce, wheat, whatever you choose here. Right? Now in practice, like in the economy, we can produce thousands of things. It's just that with 2 goods, we can have a visualization. 3, we have to have a 3-dimensional. I can't draw that. Right? As we kind of look at more and more, same principles would apply. We just can't visualize it. So everything in this class will kind of just keep to the production of 2 goods. Right? So let's say I have these 50,000 hours of labor I can devote to the production of either of these goods. Every computer is going to require me to use 100 of those labor hours. And every, say, ton of wheat, as the unit we'll use, is going to cost me 10 labor hours. So if I think about, if I put all of my labor hours towards computer production, how could I determine the number of computers I could produce? Well, if every computer cost me 100 labor hours, I have a total of 50,000. I would take 50,000 and divide it by 100. That tells me how many computers using all of my labor hours I could produce. So there I'd have 500. I'm not putting any of my workers' labor hours towards wheat, so I'm getting no wheat. Well, if I have all this technology, but my people are starving, is that a good thing for society? Probably not, right? So I might be, okay, well, what if I wanted to take some of my labor hours and put them towards wheat production? Well, I could go through these different combinations, and if I put 40,000 hours towards computer production, I could take 10,000 of those hours and put them towards wheat production. I could then do a similar thing where I take those labor hours, 40,000 divided by the number of labor hours for one computer, 40,000 over 100 gives me 400 computers. Now, every ton of wheat only costs me 10 labor hours. So if I'm putting 10,000 hours towards wheat, each unit of wheat costs me 10 labor hours. I need a total of what? Or sorry, I would get a total of what? 1,000 tons of wheat. And then kind of go on, kind of so on and so forth. Here would be what we call different combinations of these two goods I could produce using all of my labor hours or all of my resources. So I just chose 5 of them here. In theory, right, I could like go from 500 to 499, right? I could do much smaller increments. We're just going to use 5, and that should be all we need to kind of get at the concepts we're going to talk about. Any questions on that idea before we kind of progress to be a little bit more complicated here? Okay. So if I wanted to take this and graph out these different points, so I'm going to shorthand this a little bit. But anytime I want the word quantity in this class, I usually just kind of notate that with Q. So we can think about like this is the quantity of computers my economy was producing and the quantity or tons of wheat. So we said if they're only producing computers, we had what? 500, but no wheat. Okay. If I had all wheat, but no computers, I think it was we could produce 5,000. I could then start to graph any point in between. I think we said if we go from 5,000 tons of wheat to 4,000, that would give me the point of 100 computers. If I reduced the production of wheat down to 2,500, that gave me 250 computers. I could graph all those 5 points, and what I'll end up with is this line, was a little bit off here, that connects them, right? So what we're going to call this is every combination of these two goods I could produce using all of my resources. So any point on this curve, we'll kind of call like this point, point A, or if it was a point down here, we're going to call this production efficient, right? This is just one of the points. Any point on this curve, it's different combinations of these two goods I could produce using all of my resources. I'm being efficient in my production. I don't have any resources going to waste. Any questions on that idea yet? So I'm just graphing out those points. Okay. Now, what if I think about a point that's right here? Well, if I was producing 2,500 tons of wheat, I said I could only produce 200 computers. So could I produce out to this point? No. If I keep the amount of wheat I'm producing the same, I've already used all of my resources when I have 250 computers. I can't go out any further. So any point past this curve was where I was using all of my resources. So any point out here, I can't produce that combination of those two goods, or we kind of say those points are unattainable. Okay. Now, what about a point? Like, let's say I'm down here, point C. Okay. What would be true at point C? Well, I could be producing 2,500 tons of wheat and 250 computers, but I'm only producing instead 2,500 units of wheat and 100 computers. So what must be true? I'm not using all of my labor hours or using all of my resources. I chose labor hours here. It could be I'm not using all of my available iron, right? Some net like raw material. But any resource that I'm looking at, I'm not using all of it. So we can think about here, these would be any point below that production possibilities curve. We say a society or an economy there is being production inefficient. They're letting resources go to waste. Okay. I got a question in my other section, like in the context of labor, what would be production efficient is if I had unemployment. I have labor hours I'm not using. So these are kind of like our three ranges. Anything on that curve, production efficient, I'm using all of my resources. Any point past that, I don't have enough resources, that's unattainable. Any point below that, I'm not using all of my resources, I'm being inefficient. Okay. Any questions on that before we kind of jump to the next concept here? Yeah. So in this example, I'm starting out, it is linear. We'll talk next class and we'll actually relate it to things we talked about from week 1, which is that it's actually going to be bowed out. Right. So if we have time, I'll maybe mention it at the end, like give you just like kind of a sneak peek at why. Yep. But for right now, we'll keep it a little bit simple, or it's going to be linear. Okay. Any other? Yep. To draw them out. You're not, there are multiple choice, and even the quiz, you don't have to draw them out in terms, but to arrive at the correct answer, more often than not, there's a graphical representation that will help lead you to that correct answer. We'll talk about like supply and demand shifts. Technically, you can memorize all these different combinations and what's going to happen. I personally memorize a lot worse than if I have the model in mind and the concepts in my brain and can draw it out for myself. Right? So I would rely on being able to draw these graphs. You won't actually have to get the answer necessarily correct, but it's going to be more likely you get it incorrect if you're just trying to go from pure memorization and not feeling comfortable with drawing these models up. Is that what you're, did I get your question? No other questions here. Okay, so what's going to be valuable about these production possibilities curves? And you might be able to kind of think through this before I go through this next thing. So if I wanted to know the cost of one more computer, right? If I'm producing one more computer, well, if I produce one more computer, what am I not producing? Wheat, right? So here, computers are my x-axis good, right? So if I want to know the cost of one computer, it's always going to be in terms of how much wheat I'm giving up, right? Now, before we kind of go through this just intuitively, if every unit every computer I produce is 100 labor hours and every unit of wheat is 10, how many units of wheat do I have to give up to get those 100 labor hours? 10. We're going to divide by 10. Now, using my production possibilities curve, right? Even if I don't kind of know that about the labor hours, what'll always be true is the cost of your x-axis good is the slope of your production possibilities curve. How do you find the slope of a line? This is scary. I heard some murmurs. So hopefully we all know, right? That's the change in y over the change in x. So in this example, what's on my y-axis? That's the change in wheat divided by the change in my x-axis good, which is computers. Now, because we're keeping this linear for right now, I could choose any 2 points. I'm going to choose some more difficult points, and then as we go through this, show you probably what's an easier way to do this moving forward. But let's say I think about moving from here to here. Well, what's the change in my wheat production? It's going from 5,000 to 4,000, so it's going down by 1,000. What's happening to the change in the quantity of computers? It's going from 0 to 100. So sure enough, I get that value of 10 we kind of talked through intuitively earlier, but there's a negative sign out front. Well, why? Because anytime I produce something, it's always going to be a cost. I'm giving up the other good. So typically, like if I'm asking for a response, we don't need that negative sign. We inherently know it's a cost. So here, the cost of one computer is 10 what? 10 units of wheat. Or here, I think the measure of unit I was kind of referencing was like 10 tons of wheat. Okay. So the slope of our production possibilities curve always tells us the cost of our x-axis good in terms of that y-axis good. Okay. Any questions here before we keep moving? Now, because we're keeping it linear right now, I could choose any 2 points on this line. So I usually like think about what would easier points be, these extreme values. So I'd be going from what? 5,000 to 0. It's easier to find that difference. Going from 0 to 500, that would give me that same value of negative 10. I just think there, when I'm dealing with zeros, it becomes a little bit easier to calculate the change. So using those extreme points is sometimes a little bit easier just to find the slope. Any questions here before we keep moving? Okay. So one other thing I'll kind of add in here we can start to think about is, okay, I found the cost of one more computer, but what would the cost be of one more ton of wheat? Well, we know that as I produce wheat, I'm giving up or I'm not producing computers, right? So the cost of wheat is always going to be in terms of how many computers am I giving up? What ends up being true, and I'll give you a little bit of support as to why in a second, is the cost of your y-axis good, which for us, that was wheat, right? The cost of that y-axis good will always be 1 over the slope. So in this example, that would be 1 over that slope we found earlier, 10, or 1 over the cost of my x-axis good. Okay. So once I know the slope, that's the cost of my x-axis good. The cost of my y-axis good would be 1 over that. You can think about why. To produce 1 unit of wheat, I need 10 labor hours. But if I had to use 100 labor hours to produce computers, that would only be 1/10 of a computer. Now, I know that kind of seems weird in this example, right? If I have something that's an integer, I would have to like make jumps. But maybe this is something like I'm producing a product where I can produce ounces and I can produce 1/10 of an ounce, right? Or something like that. So the math becomes a little bit trickier if we do have like integer jumps. But for the sake of what we're doing, it would be 1/10 of a computer. We know that in practice, I'd then have to like maybe produce 10 more units of wheat so I could give up a full unit, but we know the per unit cost. Okay. Any questions here before I do one more thing here? Okay. So another way I could think about, if this is, I don't know, kind of tricky for you to do like 1 over the slope, I could always draw this out again. And if it's easier for you to remember that the slope of this line is always the cost of my x-axis good, well, then if I want to know the cost of 1 more unit of wheat, I'm going to put that in my x-axis. If I do that, so I now have my quantity of wheat here, I now have computers on the other axis. So now my extreme points are 500 and 5,000 here. So all I'm doing is drawing this out and flipping what good is on the x-axis. If I do that, hopefully I get the same value of 1/10 for that slope because wheat is now my x-axis good. So sure enough, if I go through and calculate my slope here, change in y over change in x. So it's the change in the quantity of computers over the change in the quantity now of my x-axis good, which is wheat. I get what? It goes from 500 to 0. it goes from 0 to 5,000. Sure enough, now my slope is negative 1/10. That's the cost of my x-axis good. The same thing that I could get if I only drew that out once and I didn't kind of have to go through and flip them, right? This is just kind of further support for this overlying concept. Right. Any questions on that idea? Just one more thing and I'll let you get out of here. Okay. So kind of leading us into next class, let's say I go back to thinking about that earlier drawing that I had, and let's say there's this point way out here. I know that it's unattainable. I can't currently get to that point. I'm using all my resources. I can't go past that production possibility. What's one way or something else that I've held constant, right? Simplified our model that could change where I could get to that point. If I have more people, right, my population is increasing, now I can get more higher combinations of both goods. I have more labor hours. Or if I have the same number of labor hours, what could allow me to produce more of both goods? So maybe how would I reduce the number of labor hours I need to produce things?
New technology.
Better technology, right? I identify a better way to set up my production process, right? Anything that makes my workers more efficient or gives me more labor hours should shift this production possibilities curve until that point becomes one of those points on my new production possibilities curve. It's now attainable and it's now production efficient. So we'll talk more about the things that shift these production possibilities curves. We'll move from linear to thinking about the shape actions of looking bowed out, tying that into cost. Other than that, your module 2 reading is due at the end of the day, Monday. Module quiz, the first module, first week quiz is due at the end of the day, Monday. If you're having any technical issues or anything, reach out as soon as possible. We should be set up. Other than that, have a fun, safe weekend. I will see you guys on Tuesday.